Everybody, Iker, small group tonight, but the Iker is quality more than quantity. And I wanted to continue. We are in the 3 weeks, and this Friday is going to be Rosh Chodesh Av. And I mentioned last week 2 thoughts from Rav Tzadok about the 3 weeks, and I'm going to mention a third one. Let me just review the 2 thoughts very, very quickly. The first thought Rav Tzadok makes is that the 3 haftorahs that we read before Tisha B'Av corresponds to a certain progression in our avodah. The first haftarah we read last Shabbos talks about the words of Yirmiyahu. The haftarah we're going to read this Shabbos talks about hearing the word of God. And the haftarah, the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, is from the Navi Isaiah, the Navi Yeshayahu, and that is Chazain, the vision. So we look at these 3 steps: speech, hearing, and vision. And what Tzadok says, that is kind of the spiritual progression we need to move in order to rectify the interpersonal chesronos and inadequacies and sins that we have. The first is that even if you're filled with negativity, you don't have to talk about it. You don't have to say Lashon Hara. Control your mouth. Shemiah, limit the negative inputs that you're getting and you're hearing. But the ultimate step has to be not just controlling your speech and controlling your conversations, but changing your perception, re-envisioning the reality that you live in. Because if a person is filled with anger and negative thoughts, he will not be able to control his speech forever. Eventually he's going to explode, and consequently the real key towards Lashon Hara is not so much controlling your speech, but changing the way you view people, to see them in a kindly way, to see the whole picture, to understand where they're coming from. And Pirkei Avos gives us the great key here: Al tadin es chavercha ad shetagiah limkomo. Do not judge your friends. Do not sit in judgment on another person, until you are in their situation. And of course, you will never be in their situation. And as a result, we don't go around judging. Obviously, a Jew has standards. Obviously, we have things that we believe in. We have truths that we hold dear. But at least on a personal level, one does not sit in judgment on the goodness or lack of goodness of another person, because you never know the totality of the experiences that they have been through. In fact, the Ramban writes in his celebrated Igeres Ramban, the letter that he wrote to his family when he came to Eretz Yisrael, that no matter whom you meet, you should basically try to identify some way in which they might be better than you. That even if on some level they are far below your spiritual attainments, perhaps if you have gone through what they went through in their life, you would not have emerged as good as they came through. So that is thought number 1, in which we look at the first words of the Haftorah: speech, hearing, vision, and that is how we try to rectify the Sinat Chinam, the hatred and polarization which caused the Churban Beis HaMikdash. The second point of Rav Tzadok is that the 3 weeks that began with the 17th of Tammuz actually should have been a happy time, because after all, when Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Luchos after 40 days at Mount Sinai, that was the 17th of Tammuz. It turned into a tragedy because of the sin of the golden calf. Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Luchos. But seen in this way, Rav Tzadok looks at the 3 weeks and the 9th of Av as kind of the negative of the 4 cups of wine. We know that we have 4 cups of wine at the Seder because that represents 4 stages of redemption which bring us closer and closer to God. The 3 weeks and Tisha B'Av represent 4 movements away from God as we experience progressively more and more severe ways that we are estranged from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So essentially it is the negative mirror image. You have 4 Lashonot of Geulah, 4 terms of redemption. Now we have 3 weeks and Tisha B'Av in which each stage of redemption is being undone as we experience galus and distancing and estrangement and isolation. But the good news is that just as if you're walking in a circle, galus is a circular path. And as you get further and further from a point, you get closer to the point on the other side. So too, galus is actually a process that brings us closer to God by creating yearning, by creating desire, by creating an awareness of how much we need HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That builds within our personalities a love and a desire to get close, and that itself brings the Geula. This is the meaning of the famous statement in Chazal that Mashiach will be born on the 9th of Av. It does not mean literally necessarily that the birthday of the person who will be Mashiach has to be the 9th of Av, but rather it means that the Geula, the redemption that the person of Mashiach represents, is born in the yearning and the mourning and the sadness of Tisha B'Av. Because the more the yearning exists, the more Hashem wants to redeem us. Hashem comes, right? Someone once asked the Kotzker Rebbe, where does God live? And the Kotzker Rebbe answered, as a child, God lives wherever he is welcomed to live. You welcome him, you want him, he's there. You don't want him, he leaves, he's not there. This is the time of year when we try to feel the wanting and the yearning and the desire, and paradoxically, as we grow in the depth of how distant we are from Hashem, we actually achieve a remarkable closeness. That is the saying, of course, absence makes the heart grow fonder. I think it's Shakespeare, and indeed that is the reality of what galus represents. That is why the darkest galus, the worst galus, is when a person doesn't even realize they're in galus. When they think everything's fine, that indeed is a very, very serious problem. That's why the Lubavitch Rebbe used to say it was easier to be Jewish in Siberia than in suburbia. In Siberia, the Russians never let you forget that you were a Jew. As difficult as life was, and indeed it was very difficult to observe the Jewish religion, but the one thing you knew is you knew you were Jewish, and you yearned to get out of there. As opposed to suburbia, where we could be lulled by material comforts and prosperity, and even glad kosher cruises, and all sorts of, even within religious life, one can certainly enjoy the best of both worlds, so to speak. But the problem is, you can't really enjoy the best of both worlds, because if you're enjoying the best of one world, you're kind of going to lose out a little bit in the next world. So you can't have it all in that sense. And this is the time of year in which we try to realize what it is that we are lacking, and in that yearning comes true redemption. Again, think about the circular path. The further you go away from a point on one side of the circle, the closer you're getting on the other side. So that was point number 2, the 3 weeks and Tisha B'Av as kind of the negatives of the 4 steps of redemption, but in that negative there actually is the positive at the same time. The third thought of Rav Tzadok is the following. He makes the point that Pirkei Avos tells us that there are 3 pillars that the world stands upon, right? Yiboneh Archives largely represents these 3 pillars. This is Shimon HaTzadik, the great Kohen Gadol of the Bayis Sheni. Shimon HaTzadik taught, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Omed, the world stands on 3 pillars, Al Torah, on the study of Torah, Al Avoda, on divine service by prayer and korbanos, and the 3rd pillar is Gemilas Chasadim, acts of loving kindness. It's a well-known theme that is why we have 3 avos. Avraham represents the serving of Hashem through loving kindness, and Yitzchak, that was a korban on the Mizbeach, represents the pillar of divine service, and Yaakov, who spent 14 years of uninterrupted study in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, whatever exactly they studied there. It was not conventional yeshiva, obviously, but that represents the pillar of Torah. And the world stands on these 3 pillars, Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim. But there's another Mishnah that says Just as the world stands on 3 pillars of holiness, the world is destroyed by 3 negative factors. And Rabbi Elazar HaKappa remarks in Pirkei Avos, Hakina v'hataiva v'hakavod motziin es ha'adam min ha'olam. Kina, jealousy, envy. Taiva, excessive lust for hedonistic pleasures. Kavod, a desire for glory, ego gratification, self-aggrandizement. Motziin es ha'adam min ha'olam, they take a person out of the world, and the Bali Mishra explained, it doesn't only mean you don't get Olam Haba, that's obvious, but it makes your life in this world miserable. If a person is consumed with jealousy, envy, a desire for kavod, an incessant desire for more and more pleasures, they will never be happy. They will never see a simcha in the life that Hashem has given them, because they're always looking at what other people have, or all the glory they're not getting, or what additional taiva they could indulge in. And therefore, Metziin es Adam min ha'olam does not only refer to the world to come, it refers to the misery of this world. But these are the great factors that destroy life, that destroy joy, that suck out the enthusiasm of a person, that distance a person from God. Kina, taiva, kavod. Seen this way, Rav Tzadok says, this is why we have 3 weeks to prepare for Tisha B'Av. Because Tisha B'Av, which on one hand is the day that we commemorate the destruction, is also the day that we're getting ourselves ready to experience the building of the Beis HaMikdash. But in order to experience the building of the Beis HaMikdash, we have to eradicate within ourselves those negative factors that created the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, and that is kina, taiva, and kavod. In fact, Rav Tzadok even connects kina, taiva, and kavod to the 3 cardinal aveiros, which caused the Chorban Bayis Rishon, of avodah zarah, idol worship, gilui arayos, sexual immorality, and shvichas damim, murder. What's the connection? So he says the following. He says jealousy is actually connected to murder. In fact, if you actually look at the crime statistics, other than terrorism and acts of war, most murders that are committed are because of various family rivalries that are connected to jealousy. You know, in the States at least, teenagers kill each other over shoes, over sneakers, over jackets. You may remember the famous or infamous O.J. Simpson murder trial more than 20 years ago. Again, all the evidence indicates that this was a killing due to some jealousy that she was with somebody else after they were divorced. It wasn't a problem, but and the like. So jealousy in its extreme culminates in murder. That's kina and shvichas damim. Then, of course, we have taiva, lust, in its extreme, leads to gilui arayos. Now, kavod and avodah zarah, this is a bit more subtle. Kavod, a person seeks honor, a person seeks glory, that leads to idolatry. In what way is that the case? Well, a few things. Kavod basically is an attitude that says, I look at myself and my needs as the center of the universe. Looking after number one, that what's good for me, I want honor, I want glory. So as a result, you replace God. The focus of your life is no longer the service and submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It becomes self-worship, self-idolization. I've made myself a God. And then I look for a religion, an icon, or an idol that will serve me and my needs instead of my submitting. It's like the old story of the person that had a barn and he was shooting arrows, and every arrow was directly on a bullseye. So somebody walked by and said, how do you always manage to get your arrows hitting the bullseye? He says, well, it's very simple. I shoot the arrow, and wherever it hits the barn, I paint the bullseye around the arrow. Meaning to say, I don't hit the bullseye, rather I make the bullseye go where the arrow goes. Now, religion is often that way. A person wants to do what they want to do, so they kind of invent or seek out the religion that will let them do whatever they want to do. So in reality, they're not worshiping God. In reality, they are worshiping themselves. So kavod turns into a form of avodah zarah. I think I mentioned before, there was a book, the professor of theology at Harvard, I think he's not alive anymore, Harvey Cox, who was a well-known Protestant theologian, wrote a book on the sociology of religion in America. It was not about Judaism in particular. And he pointed out that many people don't like organized religion. They believe in God, but they like to make up their own relationship to God. So there was a nurse whose name was Sheila, and she was interviewed. She was just a person in the book, and she said, I do believe in God, but I don't like any type of organized religion, so I have my own private religion that I call Sheilaism. So a rabbi once mentioned this, and he said, it's lucky her name wasn't Judy, because then her private religion would have been Judaism. But indeed, in many cases, that's exactly what you hear all the time. People will say, I'm Jewish, and that's not what I believe, and I don't believe in all of the stuff, so what I believe is also Judaism, so to speak, even if the name isn't Judy per se. So very, very often, instead of understanding religion as submission to a higher authority, people look at religion exclusively in terms of self-actualization and ways in which they can indulge in what they want to indulge in. And therefore, there is a beesline, there is a kesher between kavod, where I put myself in the center of my reality, and avodah zarah. So Rav Tzadok says, therefore, the 3 weeks is a period of introspection, it's a period of tshuva, it's a period where we focus on looking at kina, taiva, kavod, which in turn correspond to kina is, as I said, shvichas damim, murder, taiva is gilui arayos, and kavod is avodah zarah. And even if I don't manifest my behaviors in the extremities of avodah zarah, gilui arayos, shvichas damim, just because I don't have the extreme manifestations of the sickness, I don't have the symptoms, that does not mean I'm free of the underlying causes. If in our heart there is kina, there is taiva, there is kavod, then there's a spiritual sickness within us that we have to try to work on. Again, Baruch Hashem, many people have less of an illness, some people have more of an illness, but all of us are afflicted by these midos ra'os to one degree or another. And in order to build the Beis HaMikdash, we have to try to eradicate and improve in these areas. The example would be when you're building a physical building. The first thing you have to do is clean up the building site. You have to remove the garbage and the debris, because you can't construct a building until the junk is out of the way. Kina, taiva, v'kavod is the junk. It is the distraction. It is the blockages. So before we build, we have to try to remove and improve in these areas. Now obviously, the practicalities of how one improves depends on each person in many, many ways. Sometimes there's a general idea in Judaism that actions influence the emotions. That if I have negative emotions, to simply tell a person, stop feeling jealous, stop lusting, stop seeking kavod. How do you tell a person to change emotions? We can't automatically flip back and forth that way. But Judaism has a very interesting teaching that instead of looking at actions as the outgrowth of emotional states, we actually take the position that actions can educate the emotions. This is a famous statement of the Sefer HaChinuch, Adam nifal kefi pe'ulosav. A person is influenced according to his actions. So let's imagine, for example, husband and wife are not getting along. So one spouse complains, the other person doesn't show me affection, or I don't feel affection towards that person. So one of the things that we might say is, act even if you don't feel. Be behave as a kind person would behave, even if you don't feel that kindness. Behave as a loving person would behave, even if you don't feel the love. Now initially that is very, very hard. It's like telling a person to smile in a camera. If you're not in such a good mood, the smile itself feels fake, it may even look a little fake, and the like. But there is a point at which our actions can actually change us in positive ways. They tell a famous story. Rav Nachman of Breslov used to tell the story of a prince who labored under a delusion that he was a chicken. So he took off all of his clothes and he crawled under the table and he ate the scraps that fell off the table. And nobody could convince him that he wasn't a chicken, no matter what. So finally a wise man came, and the wise man said, I will cure the prince. So what the wise man did was he took off his clothes, he crawled under the table with the prince. And the prince, who apparently could still talk, said to him, what are you doing under the table? So the wise man said, I'm a chicken just like you. Okay, so for a while, both of them were eating scraps and crawling under the table. After a while, the Chacham puts on a pair of pants. The prince says, what are you doing? So the Chacham said, who says chickens can't wear pants? Okay, so I can put on pants too. Then he gets up. The prince says, what are you doing? The Chacham says, who says chickens can't get up? The upshot is, and Rav Nachman stretches out the story a lot, for a lot of details, that after 6 months, the prince was walking, talking, sitting at the table, doing everything a human being does. Now, was he cured? Well, a psychoanalyst would say he's not cured because he is still laboring under the insane delusion that he's a chicken. But it didn't make a difference because even though he was a chicken, he thought he was a chicken, he was doing everything a human being does. So really, does it really make a difference what you think you are if your behavior is exactly what it should be? This might be a machlokus between a psychoanalyst and a behavioral therapist. A psychoanalyst that focuses on mental perceptions would say, he's crazy, the guy is crazy. A behavioral therapist would say, he's fine, his behavior is exactly what a normal human being is. Now, Rav Nachman, as you know, taught by stories, but he very rarely, if ever, gave you the meaning of the story. He would just tell stories. I mean, he taught teachings as well, but when he would tell the story, he would not explain the meaning of the story. He left it to his audience. In fact, when somebody asked Rav Nachman, why does he teach by story? He said, yeah, listen, if I teach by Torah, some people will get it, some people won't get it, so a lot of the audience will just not get it. If I teach by story, it's a no-lose proposition. Those who understand the inner meaning got a very important message. And those who don't understand the inner meaning, they heard a good story. So everybody will benefit from the story, whether you get it, the meaning, or you don't get the meaning. Torah, if you don't get the meaning, perhaps you're not going to benefit. So Rav Nachman doesn't give us the meaning of the story, but I think the meaning is fairly obvious. Rav Nachman is referring to the fact that very often we have blockages in our personality that convince us that we're incapable of being a certain type of person. I might think, for example, I'm not capable of being a loving person. I'm not capable of being a person who learns Torah every day. I'm not capable of going over to a stranger and welcoming him to the show and saying, how are you doing? That's not me. That's against my personality. I'm a turkey. I'm a chicken. Meaning I'm not that person. But Rav Nachman says, you have the power to act as if you were, even if you're not. And in the course of acting that way, you become that person, even if you might not even feel that you have. And therefore, Rav Nachman is basically saying, don't let our mental picture of ourselves limit the person that we're capable of becoming. All of us have a mental picture of ourselves. Sometimes that mental picture very often dates from childhood. It might be a negative picture that we may have gotten from parents, from teachers. from employers. And that mental image of ourselves continues to occupy our mind and our consciousness really throughout our lives. It's quite amazing that one would think that when you're a grown-up and perhaps a parent of your own, a grandparent, whatever it would be, you'd figure that you can discard all of those images, all of those recordings, all of those pictures. They're no longer relevant in your life. And yet, like a computer virus, they continue to infiltrate, they continue to influence, they continue to restrict and limit. And as Nachman says, sometimes, instead of working on the images, work on the externalized behaviors. And the behaviors themselves chase away the images, as opposed to some direct psychoanalytic focus on those negative features that could take 50 years or whatever it is. Right? People never really get out of psychoanalysis. They can just stay in there their whole lives. So this is an aspect of the 3 weeks to be aware of, the idea that this is a time for preparing the building of the Beis HaMikdash by getting rid of the garbage and the debris that prevent God's presence from being within us. To kind of reinvent who we are by understanding that our mental images are not reality. They're simply the image we have of reality. And that image could actually be an imaginary image. It's not real. It doesn't have substance. We are greater than we imagine that we really are. And that's not an arrogant statement, because once again, it's arrogance if I say I'm great and you're not. But if we understand that all of us have this greatness within us, that is not arrogance, that's your recognition of being in the image of Hashem. God is infinite, and in each and every one of us there is a neshama that comes from the image of Hashem. So Rav Tzadok goes further, and he says a very interesting point. Rav Tzadok points out that metaphorically, this could be the meaning of the 3 categories of impure people that are expelled from various parts of the Jewish camp. We read this a few weeks ago, but I'll bring it up because it's connected to the 3 weeks. And that is, the Torah says there are 3 types of tumah, 3 types of impurity that are expelled from different areas of the Jewish camp. There is the mitzora, the leper, who is expelled, and then there's the zav, a man with a gonorrheal discharge, and then there's the tamei met, there is the person who came in contact with a dead body. So until these 3 people undergo purification rituals, they are expelled from the Jewish camp. But it gets a little more complicated, because the Jewish camp in the desert was itself divided into 3 sections. There is the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the courtyard around the tabernacle. That is called Machaneh Shechina, the camp of the divine presence. The camp of the divine presence was surrounded by the Leviim, and that is called Machaneh Leviah. And then surrounding Machaneh Leviah on all 4 sides were the regular Israelites, and that is called Machaneh Yisrael. Now, the 3 tumos are sent away from different areas. The Metzora, the leper, is expelled from all 3 camps and is essentially quarantined. He is expelled from Shechina, Leviah, and even Yisrael, and he's lagamrei chutz lamachaneh. That's the Metzora. The Zav is expelled from Shechina, Mishkan, and Leviah. If he's a Levi, he's expelled, but he is permitted to dwell among the Israelites. So if he is an Israelite, he just stays where he is. That's the Zav. The Tamei Met, the one that is Tamei because he's in contact with a dead body, is the most lenient. He is expelled from Machaneh Shechina, the Mishkan, but he is permitted in Machaneh Leviah, and Kal V'chomer he is permitted in Machaneh Shechina. In fact, not only is a Tamei Meis permitted in Machaneh Leviah, but even a dead body itself is permitted, because Moshe Rabbeinu kept in his tent the bones of Yosef that were being taken to Eretz Yisrael to be buried. Now today, in contemporary terms, this is the main halachic issue of why most religious people, there are exceptions, do not go on the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount has the status, at least part of it, I'll talk about that, has the status of Machaneh Shechina, the camp of the divine presence. A Tamei Met cannot go in Machaneh Shechina, and since the only way you can be purified from Tamei Met is by the ashes of the Para Aduma, and we do not have those ashes today, ergo, I cannot go in the Har HaBayit. Now, those people who do go in the Har HaBayit, they do have a halachic justification. They claim, and actually they are correct, but the question is how confident we are in terms of measurement, that the outer perimeter of the Temple Mount, the outer perimeter, does not correspond to the temple and the courtyard of the temple. It corresponds to where the Levium were, Machaneh Leviah. And because it is Machaneh Leviah, a Tamei Meis is allowed to go in Machaneh Leviah. So their argument is that as long as you confine yourself to certain designated areas, you are permitted to go on the Temple Mount even in a state of Tamei Met, because a Tamei Met is permitted in Machaneh Leviah, and only further inward is Machaneh Shechina. Now, in point of fact, they are 100% correct. That it is absolutely clear that there is a portion of the Temple Mount that is Machaneh Leviah and not Machaneh Shechina. The reason why most of the Torah world does not go at all is simply because we are not confident enough in our identification of the configuration of the temple that we're willing to take a chance. It's like a minefield. Imagine if there would be a minefield and somebody tells you, oh, you can go through this minefield as long as you stay 6 inches away from that bush. But if you're within 6 inches of the bush, you're going to lose a leg. Well, I don't know. I would be a little uneasy walking, 7 inches away from the bush, because what if I lose my balance? What if I trip, etc.? So as a result, the machlokas here is not really a machlokas in principle. In principle, the Dati Leumi poskim who permit going to the Har HaBayis are actually 100% correct. But the more reasonable approach on the other side is, why take a chance and gamble? Because if you're wrong, if you take one step in the wrong area, you're chayav kares. It's a very, very serious sin. Yeah.
Not to really talk about the temple per se, but in terms of going to the Machaneh Leviah, does the halachas apply the same about not having this walking stick or leather shoes?
No. That only applies. It's only Machaneh Shechina. So even though it mentions Har HaBayit, it's referring to the part of the Har HaBayit that's Machaneh Shechina. Yeah. Okay. So now let's go back to the halachic structure here. The Mitzorah is expelled from all 3 camps. The Zav is expelled from 2 camps and is allowed in Israel. The Tamei Mes is only expelled from Shechina and is allowed in Leviah and Israel. So here is Reb Tzadok's brilliant insight. He says that the tumos of Tzaras, of Mitzorah, Zav, and Tamei Met are actually physical and spiritual manifestations of these underlying rot of kina, taiva, v'kavod. As he connects the 3 forms of tumah to these 3 negative factors. He connects Mitzorah to jealousy. He connects Zav to taiva. He connects Tamei Mes to kavod. So let's see the association. The connection of Mitzorah to jealousy is a fairly straightforward one. We know that tsaras, which is a physical manifestation of a skin disease, but it's not a contagious disease. It is not a medical condition, although it manifests itself in the skin. But it is a warning, so to speak, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that there are averos that need to be corrected. And the primary avera for which tsaras came in the time of the Beis HaMikdash was, of course, the sin of Lashon Hara. In fact, the word mitzorah comes from motzi ra, he brings out bad about people. Now, if we understand that saras is a punishment and an atonement for lashon hara, we then go further and understand that the root of lashon hara is often jealousy. The desire we have to disparage other people. The geschmack that we get by tearing people down is often because we have a sense of jealousy. I see somebody who is successful, smarter than me, richer than me, more successful in life. I feel uncomfortable. Why is he up there and I'm down here? Now, there are two things I could do. I could try to raise myself to their level, or I could try to pull him down to my level. Well, gravity is an easier force to work with. And therefore, lashon hara is the idea of, I want to tear somebody down because I am envious, I am jealous of their accomplishments. So therefore, spiritually, sarat corresponds to jealousy. It is connected to jealousy because jealousy is often the root of lashon hara. So, jealousy is treated as something totally destructive, totally negative. And therefore the mitzorah that represents jealousy is expelled not only from Machane Shechina and Machane Leviah, but there's even an expulsion from Machane Yisrael, because jealousy is simply an unproductive, indeed destructive emotion that has no place, no legitimate role in a Jewish society. It's hard to get rid of. We all have it. But there's nothing good about it. Now, you may ask me a question. How can I say there's nothing good about jealousy? Is there not a famous Maimer Chazal that says jealousy among Torah students increases wisdom? Kinas sofrim, marbe chochma, because, you're learning, so I want to learn more, etc. Isn't that positive? But the answer is, there are two forms of jealousy. A jealousy that says, you're achieving, so I also want to achieve, that can be a motivator. That's not the highest motivation, but that can be a motivator. Competition within limits can be an appropriate motivator. But a jealousy that says, not that I want to succeed, but I want you to fail, I want to tear you down, that has no legitimate place. Again, we have it. I'm not suggesting that it's easy to get rid of. Even in innocuous ways, you'll often find, if you have a group of people and they decide to go on a diet, or one member decides to go on a diet, this happens especially among women, and one is succeeding by willpower, you will often find in subtle ways the other members will try to undermine the achievement. They'll say, you used to be such a friendly person before you went on that diet, I liked you when you were heavier, whatever it is. And there's a whole psychological dynamic in which if somebody is succeeding, and misery loves company, meaning if we're all failing, we like to have other people fail with us, it kind of makes us feel okay. But if somebody is succeeding, they become a threat. So the connection between lashon hara and jealousy is a fairly strong connection. It may not explain every case of lashon hara, but it does explain why we like to tear down our heroes, our politicians. Unfortunately, we like to tear down even our gedolim. If you really knew this person, I could tell you something about him, and the like. And since jealousy that manifests itself by destroying is totally evil, it gets banished from all stages of Jewish life. Shechina, Leviah, Yisrael. Now, we then come to the second category of Tumah, which is the Tumah of Ezav. Now, Ezav does not mean a seminal emission. Ezav, as I said before, means a man that essentially has gonorrhea. He has pus, discharges of pus, infected pus that are connected to gonorrhea. Well, the connection of a sexually transmitted disease to taiva is a fairly clear connection. An abundance of taiva can get a person precisely those diseases. But here we have an interesting anomaly. Our relationship to jealousy and our relationship to physical pleasure is not the same. In fact, our relationship to physical pleasure is much more complicated than our relationship to jealousy. Vis-a-vis jealousy, as hard as it is to overcome jealousy, and of course it's very difficult, but at least in theory I can say jealousy, no good. When it comes to physical pleasure, I can't really say that. Number one, a certain amount of physical pleasure is necessary to live. You have to eat, right? That's why they say food addictions are the hardest addictions to break, because you cannot go cold turkey on a food addiction. I can stop smoking, I can stop drugs, I can stop alcohol. I can't stop eating. I have to eat. So number one, by definition, some physical pleasure is necessary, but not only is it necessary, it's even desirable. The Talmud Yerushalmi actually says, after 120 years, God is going to call us to account for every pleasure in this world we could have had, that would be permitted, that we didn't have. Because Hashem created a world full of pleasures. Because He wants us to enjoy life, whether it's color, whether it's music, whether it's taste. Because that enhances our love of Hashem, our gratitude to Hashem. It validates, as it were, the fact that Hashem certified that this world can be a good world. We can destroy it, but it can be a good world. And that's what Shimshon of Hirsch used to say. He lived in Germany, near the Alps, near Switzerland, that God is going to ask every person, did you see the Alps and marvel at them? I put them there for your pleasure and astonishment and enjoyment. So, unlike jealousy, which I can label as totally bad, I can't label taiva as totally bad. Part of it is necessary and part of it is beneficial to enhance your spiritual appreciation of the Almighty. Those of you that are familiar with Rabbi Victor Miller knows that he often wrote and talked about when you pick up a fruit, an apple, a banana, you go through a whole meditation about color and texture. I can't really do it justice, but just to appreciate the beauty and the kindness of God in giving you all of these different things. Right? God could have made food to be mush. He'd give you the nutrition, but He created taste and color and smell. These are pleasure-enhancing things. So the premise to the idea that taiva has a makom in life is the following. The Zav gains admission in Machane Yisrael. Machane Yisrael is what we'll call ordinary Jewish life. In ordinary Jewish life, some connection to taiva has a makom, has a place, has a legitimacy. Judaism frowns on excessive asceticism. The Nazir is a sinner because he's depriving, at least according to one opinion, he's depriving himself of a legitimate pleasure. But here's the thing. As you grow in your status as Eved Hashem, as you graduate from ordinary life to assume the status of the Levi, that is the total servant of God, and Kal V'chomer when you're actually with Hashem, this is a spiritual level. And that was, in other words, the geographic areas are symbolic of spiritual levels of ascendancy. Then your connection to the material world becomes less important, not because it's a self-conscious renunciation, but simply because the same way a child, as he grows older, stops playing with certain toys automatically, so the physical aspects of the world have less interest to me because I'm more connected to a higher level. Now this is an important distinction. This is not the distinction that says, oh, I would love to have that cake, but I'm going to force myself not to have it. This is simply a natural no longer being interested in the cake because you're so connected to higher spiritual ideas. So as a result, therefore, the Zav gains admission into Machane Yisrael, but the Levi and the Shekhinah, that automatically falls away. Now, we then come to the Tamei Met. Now the Tamei Met, Rav Tzadok says, is connected to kavod. Now this is not such an obvious association, but here he says the following. In Hashem's original plan, Adam and Chava were supposed to live forever. Death came into the world as a result of the chait of the Eitz Hadas. But how did the Nachash entice Chava to eat from the Eitz Hadas? Well, he pushed her against the tree, nothing happened, etc. So Rav Tzadok sees now that the key entrapment was the line, B'yam achalcha mimenu, the day that you eat from the tree, from the fruit, v'hayisem kelekim, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, however you understand this very difficult passage, the Eitz Hadas is being marketed as a God pill. Eat this fruit, and you will have knowledge of the divine. That is an appeal to the ultimate ego trip. You will be God. And Rav Tzadok says, therefore, death came into the world as a consequence of man's ego that was seeking to become ever more godlike. Now, in reality, we are godlike in many ways. First of all, we are made in the image of God. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? God does not have a physical image, but it means we have the attributes of God. We have autonomy, we have free will, we have intelligence, we have abstraction, we have the ability to control nature. We can create life, although not from nothing, and we can destroy life. We have tremendous power. But with that power comes the risk of egotism and hubris. And therefore God put death into the world, not so much as a punishment, but as an ultimate reminder that as godly and as godlike as we are, there is an unbridgeable chasm, an unbridgeable gap between creator and created that is manifest in immortality. So it turns out that death and the impurity of death is connected with ego and gaiva and arrogance. That is why the ritual that purifies us from death is the ritual connected with the ashes of Para Aduma. Now, without getting into all of the details of Para Aduma, obviously that itself is a mystery, but the Sfas Emes writes that the concept of ashes is a symbol of humility and submission. Meaning to say, if death comes into the world because of arrogance and gaiva, I become liberated from the impurity of death by connecting to ashes and humility. All of you know the Greek myth of the phoenix bird, which is the bird that is burnt into ashes, and it rises from the ashes. In truth, Chazal have a very similar medrash. For some reason, Chazal is less known than the Greek mythology. But the concept of life being generated from ashes is a very, very profound idea. Meaning a medrash like this does not have to be literal. It's conveying an idea. One idea might pertain to the Jewish people as a whole, that no matter how much we've been destroyed, out of the ashes will come life. And that's certainly an appropriate message for this period of year. But in an individualistic, spiritual sense, it's making a different point. And that is, it is by the process of obliterating my ego that I actually achieve life. As long as I'm filled with egotism and gaiva, I'm not really living because I'm blocking the divine light from entering me. When I obliterate my ego, I've made room for God in my heart. And therefore, out of the ashes comes life. Death comes into the world because of arrogance and gaiva, we become liberated from death by humility and submission. But now, here's the rub. You note that the Tamei Meis is fairly lenient. The Tamei Meis is expelled from the Shechina, from the Mikdash, the Temple Mount, but is allowed in Machane Leviah, and is certainly allowed in Machane Yisrael. Why is that so? So here is the interesting subtlety. On one hand, kavod, ego, gaiva, arrogance is evil. On the other hand, there are aspects of it that are absolutely necessary. Because if a person truly regarded themselves as nothing, if I regarded myself as just ashes, you could say I've achieved obliteration of the self. In a sense, that would destroy his connection with God, because a person would then conclude, why do my mitzvahs matter? Why does my life matter? Why does Hashem care if I daven or learn or do chesed? Who am I to do any of these things? In a sense, in order to serve God, you have to have a sense that you matter, that you make a difference, that your life is significant, that you count. You have to be a person that has a sense of kavod, not arrogance vis-a-vis other people, but a sense of significance, of gravitas, of weightiness. So, kavod, which Tamei Meis represents, is not only necessary in ordinary Jewish life, which is Machane Yisrael, but kavod is even necessary for the Levi that has graduated to Avodas Hashem. Because the Eved Hashem has to feel that what they do makes a difference. Rabbi Yerucham of Mir used to say that the person who is not aware of his flaws is a stupid person, a foolish person. If I think I'm perfect, I'm just a fool. But a person who is not aware of their greatness is a tragic person, because they will never become the person that they were capable of becoming. And that's a very, very sad tragedy. You know, when the Chazon Ish died in 1955, so at the Levaya in Bnei Brak, Reb Dessler, the famous Reb Dessler, was the mashgiach of Panovich at Saudi, had come from England, and there was a boy at the Levaya that was sobbing. And Reb Dessler went over to the boy and said, why are you crying over the Rav, the Gaon, and the Tzaddik that's buried here, pointing to the grave? He then pointed to the boy, why don't you cry over the Rav, the Gaon, and the Tzaddik that's buried in you? Because the Rav, the Gaon, and the Tzaddik that's buried in the ground became the Rav, the Gaon, and the Tzaddik that he was supposed to become. But what about all of us who don't become? So therefore, paradoxically, what Tzadok says, the Tamei Meis represents kavod. But kavod is necessary in ordinary life, and it's necessary in spiritual life. The only thing is, when you finally reach a level of total unity with God, whatever that means, a certain devekas, then you can throw away all of the artificial pushes that you needed to get you there. It's like a rocket. A rocket needs a very strong jet propulsion to get out of the Earth's orbit. But once it's in space, it can let go of all of that propulsion, because without gravity, it'll keep on going, whatever it would be. So therefore, Reb Tzadok says, the three forms of Tumah represent three negative factors, but the three negative factors themselves have a different type of balance and intensity. Jealousy, totally bad. Taiva, legitimate in ordinary life, but spiritually we should graduate away from it. Kavod, in a non-arrogant way, we actually need, not only in ordinary life, but even in spiritual life, until we reach a state of total devekas, where it no longer matters. And that is reflected in the Mitzvah, the Zav, and the Tamei Meis, and why they are expelled from the different different camps. Again, it's a very, very beautiful work because it takes a technical halachic construct and it shows us the spiritual meaning behind them. Be it as it may, we are approaching the month of Av. It's interesting, Chazal described the month of Av, Mishenichnas Av Mima'atim B'simcha. Right, when the month of Av comes, we reduce our joy. And conversely, it says, Mishenichnas Adar, when the month of Adar comes, Marbim B'simcha, we increase our joy. Rav Schwab makes an interesting observation. You never shut off Simcha entirely. When Av comes, reduce the Simcha. When Adar comes, increase the Simcha. But Simcha never goes away. Even in Av, there's Simcha because we have Emunah, we have Bitachon, that there's going to be redemption, there's going to be Geula, there's going to be Mashiach, there's going to be a Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, even in Av, we have Simcha. And in fact, this is reflected with the interesting paradox that on the 9th of Av itself, we don't recite Tachanun because it's considered to be a holiday, a Yom Tov. It's the day Mashiach is going to be born, as I said earlier. In fact, there's an old minhag of Yerushalayim. I don't know how many Yolim do this, but the old Yerushalmis, that the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, they clean their house and they sweep the floors in preparation for the coming of Mashiach. And they do that b'dafka on Tisha B'Av itself, affirming their emunah b'bias hagoel. Now, some of you might know the Machlis family, very, very well-known family in Malat Dafna. Unfortunately, Rebbe Malchus was nifter a few years ago, but they were legendary, and they still are legendary. They're continuing the practice for their hachnasas orchim, their hospitality. They have, may have 100 people, for Shabbos and whatever it is. They, in their apartment, they have part of an unpainted wall, where they left part of the wall unpainted, which is called a Zeicher L'Chorban. But right next to it, they have a can of paint and a paintbrush that they leave there, expressing the idea that the time is going to come that we're going to paint it. Right? So side by side with the mourning is the Amunah in the Bias HaGeula. So may we be zeicher to this Geula, b'mehei v'yameinu. Good night.
So next Tuesday night there's a shiur, and the following Tuesday night we're not sure yet.
Yeah.
Shir Chadash